On Christmas Eve, I trusted my dad enough to drink the glass he handed me. The next thing I remember is waking up groggy, my stepmom standing over me with a smirk holding a razor. My head was shaved. She laughed like it was the funniest gift of the night. And then, through the half-open door, I heard my dad's voice. "She looks just like her mother." When she snapped, my blood ran cold. They thought they broke me. But when I walked into Christmas dinner with nothing left to lose, they panicked. It all started the moment I came home that snowy night in Vermont. The snow in Vermont had a way of muting the world, pressing everything into a heavy silence that felt almost sacred. I stood at the edge of the driveway with my small suitcase, staring up at the house that had been in the Miller family for decades. My dad Liam used to tell me it was his pride and joy, a place where memories were built and traditions lived on. Tonight, as I forced my boots through the icy slush, it felt less like tradition and more like a stage. The house glowed with warm yellow light wreaths hanging on every window, laughter faintly echoing from inside. It looked like Christmas. It smelled like Christmas. But to me, it felt like walking back into a trap I had tried to escape for years. I had not been home for Christmas since I was 22. Now I was 27, and a part of me had hoped things might be different. That my dad had softened with age, that Victoria, my stepmother, had found some scrap of decency. My brother Daniel had called me in October, his voice unusually warm, asking me to come. He said Dad wanted peace in the family, that we should put old wounds behind us. Against my better judgment, I agreed. There was still a little girl inside me who longed for a place at that table, who wanted her family to see her not as a burden, but as someone who belonged. The front door swung open before I could even knock. Victoria stood there tall and polished, her blonde hair swept into a perfect bun, her red silk blouse catching the glow of the chandelier behind her. She smiled wide, too wide, the kind of smile that stretches over disdain like icing over a stale cake. "Ella," she said with that false warmth she had perfected, "you made it." I forced a smile. "Merry Christmas, Victoria." She stepped aside, and I dragged my suitcase across the polished hardwood floor. The smell of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Guests milled about the living room with glasses of wine. Some were extended relatives I had not seen since childhood. Others were friends of Liam's from the medical community. Everyone looked comfortable at ease, wrapped in cashmere and pearls. Daniel was the first familiar face I saw. He rushed forward, his tie slightly crooked, his cheeks flushed from the heat. He hugged me quick and awkward, like he wanted to prove he cared without letting it linger. "I missed you, sis," he said. I nodded, holding on to that fragile hope that he meant it. Maybe Daniel really did want me here. Then I saw my dad. Liam Miller had aged his once dark hair, now streaked with silver, his face lined with the kind of gravity that comes from years of authority. He wore a charcoal suit even on Christmas Eve, a glass of red wine in his hand. His eyes landed on me, sharp and calculating. For a moment, I thought I saw something like tenderness. Then it vanished. "Ella," he said, his voice even controlled. "Glad you came." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thanks for inviting me, Dad." He gave me a small nod as if I were a guest, not his daughter. Then he turned back to the group he was speaking with. Victoria placed a hand on my shoulder and guided me toward the dining room. "You must be tired from the drive. Why don't you sit down and have something to drink?" On the table, silver trays gleamed with hors d'oeuvres, crystal glasses filled with wine and champagne. I had not eaten all day. My stomach tightened as Victoria pressed a glass into my hand. It was red wine, the same as Liam's. "Drink up," she said. "It's a special vintage." I hesitated. Something about the way her eyes held mine made my skin prickle. Still, I lifted the glass and took a sip. The wine was heavy, rich, almost sweet. Too sweet. Around me, voices rose in laughter, clinking glasses. Daniel tried to pull me into conversation with a cousin. Victoria drifted back to Liam's side, whispering something in his ear that made him smirk. As the evening wore on, the warmth of the fire and the wine pulled me into a strange haze. My limbs felt heavy. The laughter around me became muffled. Daniel's words blurred the edges of his face, bending like glass underwater. "I need to lie down," I murmured. "I'll show her," Victoria said quickly, stepping forward. She took my arm, her nails biting into my skin through the sleeve of my coat. She led me down the hall to the guest room, the same sterile room I had stayed in as a teenager when I was no longer allowed to sleep in my old bedroom. "Lie down here," she said, pulling back the blanket. "Get some rest." I sank onto the bed. The ceiling swam above me. My chest tightened with dread, but my body would not obey my mind. My last clear memory was Victoria standing at the foot of the bed, that smile playing at her lips as everything went black. When I woke, the world felt raw and cold. My head throbbed as if a vice had clamped down on my skull. I raised a trembling hand and touched my hair. But there was no hair. My scalp was bare, prickly with stubble. I gasped, scrambling off the bed. My reflection stared back at me from the full-length mirror across the room. My head was shaved clean. My face looked alien, vulnerable, stripped. The door creaked and I turned. Victoria leaned against the frame, her arms crossed, her smile wide and triumphant. "Look at you," she said lightly. "Just like your mother." I stumbled back, horror clawing up my throat. She laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in the small room. "Don't look so surprised. You always wanted attention. Now you have it." Her laughter cut into me, cruel and ringing. I wanted to scream, to strike out, but my body was still weak. I pressed my hands against the dresser to steady myself. Then I heard it. From beyond the doorway, Liam's voice carried down the hall. He was speaking to someone, maybe Victoria, maybe Daniel. His tone was calm, almost clinical. "She looks just like her mother when she snapped." The words pierced me like ice. I froze, my heart pounding. He said it without hesitation, as if he had been waiting to say it. The implication was unmistakable. He wanted me to unravel. He wanted to cast me in the same light as Margaret. The mother I barely remembered, the mother everyone insisted had lost her mind. Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her laughter fading into the distance. The door remained ajar. I stood in that room, staring at the stranger in the mirror, my scalp bare, my body shaking. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had recreated the fall of Margaret. But as the firelight flickered under the door and the sound of cutlery and laughter drifted from the dining room, a clarity settled over me. I had nothing left to lose. I straightened my back, pulled on the sweater draped across the chair, and opened the door. The house smelled of roasted ham and pine. My bare scalp tingled in the cold air of the hallway. Voices hushed as I walked into the dining room. Every eye turned to me, shock rippling across the table. Liam set down his wine glass. Victoria's smile faltered for the first time. Daniel's jaw dropped, his face pale. I pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The silence stretched. "Merry Christmas," I said softly. The room remained frozen, no one daring to speak. My heart hammered, but my voice held steady. "If you wanted me to look like her," I whispered, "then tonight you got your wish." And I stared at them, every one of them knowing that the game had just begun. The silence in the dining room stretched so long that I could hear the faint ticking of the granddad clock in the hallway. My bare scalp tingled under the heat of the chandelier, and my hands pressed against my knees to keep them from trembling. I forced myself to lift my chin. My voice, though low, cut through the hush that had descended on the table. "Merry Christmas." Nobody moved. My dad's eyes fixed on me, gray and sharp, his jaw tight as if he were restraining something. Victoria sat beside him, her lips pursed in a half-smile, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. Daniel shifted in his chair, his napkin crumpled in his hand, his gaze darting between me and our dad. I could feel the weight of every guest's stare on my exposed head. I leaned back in the chair, pretending a calm I did not feel. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I refused to bow under their judgment. I reached for the water glass in front of me, the cool condensation dampening my fingers, and took a sip. Finally, Liam cleared his throat. "Eat," he said. His voice was flat a command more than an invitation. The servers moved again, placing silver trays on the table. Roasted ham, glistening with honey glaze, bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans, almondine cranberry sauce. The smell of cloves and cinnamon filled the air, but my stomach churned too hard to feel hunger. Victoria broke the silence first. "What an interesting new look," she said, her tone falsely light. Not many women could pull that off. A few nervous laughs escaped from the cousins at the far end of the table. I stared at her, catching the satisfaction in her eyes. She wanted me to cower, to shrink under the shame of what had been done to me. Instead, I said, "My mother used to wear her hair long, didn't she?" "Dad?" The question hung heavy in the air. Liam's fork clinked against his plate. "Yes," he said finally, his tone clipped. "She liked it that way." I swallowed. I was only 4 when she disappeared, but I still remember her brushing it in front of the mirror. She would hum softly, and I would sit on the rug, playing with the strands she let fall into my hands. The room shifted uncomfortably. Daniel lowered his eyes. A cousin coughed into her napkin. Victoria chuckled as if I had told a joke. "Memory can be tricky, Ella. Sometimes we remember what we want, not what actually happened." I felt the anger rise, but I kept my voice steady. "I remember more than you think." Her smile flickered. For years, I had let their silence define the story of Margaret Miller. They had painted her as unstable, unwell, someone who walked away from her family because she could not cope. But I remembered fragments that told another story. Nights when she whispered to me that she loved me more than anything. Afternoons when her hands shook as she tried to write in her notebook, and Liam would snatch the pen away, saying she needed rest. The way she hugged me too tightly before vanishing one winter night, leaving behind nothing but questions. I lifted my water glass again, my reflection distorted in its surface. You all want me to sit here and eat like nothing happened. But I look at this table at the perfect wreaths and candles, and all I see is the shadow of the woman you erased. The air grew heavy. Even the servers moved quietly, eyes averted. Daniel finally spoke. Ella, maybe we should talk about this later. I turned to him. You want later, Daniel. When is later? How many more years do we have to pretend? He opened his mouth but shut it. Again his cheeks flushed. Victoria leaned forward, her bracelets clinking softly. Enough. Tonight is Christmas Eve. We will not sit here and let bitterness poison the meal. I smiled without warmth. Poison, an interesting choice of word. Her eyes narrowed. The plates were being passed around, food landing on china, but my appetite was gone. I felt the tension pressing in, the unspoken pact in this table to keep secrets buried. But the image of my shaved head in the mirror burned behind my eyes. I could not let it rest. I tapped my fingers against the tablecloth, forcing the words out calmly. If my mother was so unwell, why do I remember her begging to leave with me? Why do I remember her notebook filled with plans to move us away? No one answered. The only sound was the scraping of silverware. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice so only the family closest to me could hear. If you wanted me to resemble her, you succeeded. But if you think I will break the way she did, you're wrong. Liam's eyes finally met mine. His voice was low, each word deliberate. Enough. The force of his tone pushed me back in my chair, but I refused to look away. My hands were trembling beneath the tablecloth, yet I held his gaze. The evening dragged on, conversations sputtering and dying. Guests spoke in hushed tones, trying to steer talk to weather or gifts. But the shadow of my words hung over everything. My scalp burned under the chandelier's light. The smell of roasted ham turned sour in my nose. I excused myself before dessert. My legs wobbled as I left the table, but I kept my head high. The hallway was dark, lit only by the glow of candles on the mantel. My reflection in the glass panes of the door startled me again. This bare skull, this stranger? I slipped into the sitting room away from the crowd. The leather armchairs still held the faint scent of my dad's pipe tobacco. I sank into one, gripping the arms, trying to steady my breath. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. Memories came unbidden. Margaret's face blurred with time but vivid in feeling, her voice telling me bedtime stories, her hands tucking the blanket around me. Then the night she vanished, the cold shock of waking to find her gone. My dad's grim face, Victoria's voice whispering that my mother was too sick to stay. I buried my face in my hands. They wanted me to believe I was unraveling, that what I remembered was fantasy. But deep inside, I knew it was not madness. It was true. The door creaked. Daniel stepped in quietly, his tie loosened, his face pale. He closed the door behind him. Ella, he said softly, you shouldn't bring this up like that. I lifted my head. Like what? Like telling the truth. He shifted uncomfortably. People don't understand. They think Mom really was unstable. Dad did what he thought was best. I stood, my voice shaking. Do you believe that, Daniel? Do you? He opened his mouth, then shut it, eyes darting away. I could see the conflict tearing at him. I took a step closer. You were older. You saw more than I did. Tell me you don't remember her crying. Tell me you don't remember the nights she begged Dad to let her leave. His shoulders slumped. He whispered, I remember. My chest tightened. Then why do you stay silent? He looked at the floor. Because silence is easier. Anger surged hot in my veins. Easier for who? For you, for Dad. Certainly not for her. He flinched, his voice barely audible. I can't. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. You already did. I pushed past him and out into the hallway, the sound of laughter from the dining room rising again as if nothing had happened. The night outside the windows was dark, snowflakes drifting lazily under the porch light. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, grounding myself. They thought this humiliation would break me, but each cruel act only sharpened my resolve. The truth about Margaret was buried in this house and these people, and I would not leave without uncovering it. Behind me, the voices carried from the dining room, muffled by the walls. I closed my eyes and drew a long breath. This was only the beginning. The fire in the hearth had burned low by the time the last of the guests drifted to their cars, their voices fading into the cold Vermont night. I remained at the table long after the plates were cleared, staring at the flicker of candlelight against the crystal glasses. My scalp itched beneath the scarf I had wrapped around it, the tender skin raw and unforgiving. Every glance at me during dinner replayed in my mind every widening of eyes, every whispered murmur when I walked into the room bare and humiliated. Yet I had forced myself to sit at that table to hold their stares, to make them see me. When I finally rose from the chair, my legs were stiff and my heart heavy. Daniel was lingering near the sideboard, pretending to rearrange glasses. His eyes met mine for only a second before darting away. I knew he wanted to speak, but fear held him. I carried the weight of that silence upstairs, each step echoing through the empty hallway. In the guest room, I shut the door and collapsed onto the bed. My hands trembled as I pulled off the scarf, exposing the bare truth of what they had done. The mirror across the room reflected a stranger, a woman who had been stripped of vanity, stripped of comfort, yet somehow sharpened by the cruelty. I pressed my palms to my face and fought back the tears that burned at the edges of my eyes. I remembered fragments of Margaret then, her laughter soft and fleeting, the way she smelled faintly of lavender soap, the warmth of her arms when she held me. The image was fragile, a memory I had clung to like a lifeline. And yet Liam had compared me to her in the cruelest way, twisting her into a warning as if madness was a legacy he believed I carried. The hours crawled by. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the old house, the occasional burst of laughter from Victoria's room down the hall. At some point, I rose, unable to bear the weight of the silence, and paced the room. My bare scalp tingled with every brush of cool air. I pulled out my old leather notebook and began writing, letting the words spill across the page. I wrote about the humiliation, about Liam's voice cutting into me, about Victoria's laughter. I wrote about Margaret, about the fragments of her I remembered, and about the gnawing question of why she had vanished. When dawn broke pale and cold, I had not slept. My eyes were raw, but my spirit was unbroken. I folded the scarf carefully around my head again and went downstairs. The house was already stirring, Victoria bustling in the kitchen, her voice brisk and commanding. The smell of coffee drifted through the air. I walked into the kitchen and every head turned toward me. Victoria's smile stretched thin. "Good morning, Ella. Sleep well." I held her gaze. "Well enough." She poured coffee into a porcelain cup and slid it toward me across the counter. "Drink," she said softly, almost kindly, but I saw the glint in her eyes. I shook my head. "I will pour my own." Her smile flickered, and for a moment something cold slipped across her face. She turned away quickly, humming to herself as though nothing had happened. Daniel entered then, his face drawn. He paused when he saw me, then poured himself coffee without a word. The silence between us was thick, but I felt the questions pressing in on him. I wanted him to speak, to break the silence that had kept us captive for years, but he could not. I spent the morning drifting through the house, wandering the familiar halls that no longer felt like home. Every photograph on the wall, every family portrait seemed to hold secrets. I stopped at one picture of Margaret holding me as a baby. Her smile was bright, but her eyes seemed distant, as though even then she knew her happiness was fragile. Victoria found me there, her footsteps sharp on the polished floor. She stood beside me, studying the photograph with feigned nostalgia. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" she said. "But beauty is not enough when the mind is weak." I turned to her, my voice low. "Or when the husband is cruel." Her lips curled. "Careful, Ella. Words can make people think you are unstable." I forced a smile. "Perhaps they will start to wonder why you sound so afraid." Her eyes narrowed and she walked away without another word. The afternoon passed slowly, the house filled with the clatter of preparations for another dinner. Relatives were expected again, though fewer this time, as whispers of the night before had spread. I sat by the window in the den, staring out at the snow when Olivia arrived. She was a friend I had not seen in years, but she had always believed me, always carried the fragments of truth I clung to. She slipped off her coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and hugged me tightly. Her eyes flicked to the scarf on my head. "What happened, Ella?" I swallowed hard. "They tried to make me disappear." Her face tightened with fury. "What did they do to you?" I shook my head. "Later. Right now I need to know what you have." She opened her bag and pulled out a small stack of papers. "I found these in an old box. They are notes from Margaret written in her hand. She was planning to leave. She wanted to take you." My chest constricted as I held the papers. Margaret's handwriting was shaky but clear. Words of fear, of desperation, of love. She wrote of Liam controlling her, of Victoria whispering poison. She wrote that if anything happened, it would not be her choice. Tears stung my eyes as I traced the letters with my finger. She had tried to protect me. She had tried to fight. Daniel entered, then stopping short when he saw Olivia. His eyes darted to the papers in my hand. "What is that?" he asked. His voice strained. Olivia's gaze hardened. "The truth." Daniel paled, his lips parting as though he wanted to protest, but no words came. He turned and left quickly, his footsteps echoing up the stairs. I clutched the papers to my chest, my breath uneven. Olivia touched my arm. "This is just the beginning, Ella. You are not alone." For the first time in years, I believed it. The evening arrived with another dinner, the table set as lavishly as before. The guests were quieter this time, their eyes watchful, their voices subdued. Liam sat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone, Victoria at his side with her practiced smile. Daniel sat across from me, his hands fidgeting in his lap. I kept the papers hidden in my pocket, their weight grounding me. As the meal progressed, I studied every face at the table, every twitch, every flicker of unease. The silence grew heavier, and I realized something undeniable. The Miller family was crumbling, its facade cracking. Victoria lifted her glass and smiled at me, her eyes gleaming with malice. "To my family," she said. I raised my own glass, my voice steady. "To the truth." The words hung in the air, and the silence that followed was louder than any toast. The wind outside rattled the old shutters as I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the events of the night still clawing at me. My scalp felt raw against the pillow, my skin tender from the razor that had stripped me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Victoria's laughter, sharp and triumphant, echoing in the dark corners of my mind. I did not sleep, not really. I drifted in and out of restless dozes until the faint gray light of dawn seeped into the room. By the time I heard voices and clinking dishes downstairs, my body was heavy but my nerves were tight like wire. I forced myself into the shower, the water warm but unforgiving against the sensitive patches of my scalp. I wrapped a scarf around my head before walking into the hallway. The house already smelled of cinnamon rolls and coffee, Victoria's attempt at painting a picture-perfect holiday morning. I followed the sound of chatter to the living room where guests milled about, with mugs in hand, laughter brushing against the tension that still lingered. I had no desire to join them. Instead, I stepped into the small den near the back, hoping for a moment of quiet. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The name on the screen made me stop breathing for a moment. Olivia. I answered quickly, pressing the phone to my ear. Ella, her voice was urgent. "I went through the boxes I told you about, the ones I found in that storage unit your dad used to rent. You're not going to believe what was inside." My grip on the phone tightened. "What was it?" "A journal," she said. "It looks like it belonged to your mother. Margaret wrote about feeling trapped, about being given pills she didn't want to take. She described conversations she overheard between your dad and Victoria." My knees nearly buckled. "Where is it now?" "In my car," Olivia replied. "I'm bringing it to you. I'll be in Vermont by this afternoon." I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my racing heart. "Thank you." "Just be careful." "Always," she said, and the line went dead. I sat there in the den, my whole body shaking. A journal. Proof that my mother had not been mad. Proof that someone had orchestrated her downfall. I wanted to weep with relief, but I swallowed it down. There was no time for tears. The door creaked behind me. I turned quickly, and there was Victoria, leaning against the frame with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Listening to your little secrets," she said. My throat tightened. How long had she been there? Had she heard Olivia's name? "Just catching up with the friend," I replied, forcing a calmness I did not feel. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood. "I do hope you're not planning to dredge up the past. It's not very festive." I straightened my back. Some things can't stay buried forever. Her smile widened, but her eyes flashed with irritation. "You always were dramatic, like your mother." I clenched my fists. "If being like her means not being like you, I'll take it." Her face hardened for a second before she turned on her heel and left, her perfume lingering in the room like smoke. I sank back into the chair, my mind spinning. She had definitely heard part of the call. I would need to be careful when Olivia arrived, but knowing that Margaret's own words were on their way gave me a strength I had not felt in years. By noon, the house was buzzing again, the holiday lunch preparations filling the air with the smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing. I stayed mostly in the background, watching Daniel from across the room. He laughed with cousins, tried to act as though nothing was wrong, but I could see the unease in the way he tugged at his collar, the way his eyes flicked toward me, then darted away. The hours dragged until the crunch of tires on the icy driveway jolted me from my restless waiting. I glanced out the window and saw Olivia's old sedan pulling up. Relief flooded me. I hurried to the front door, trying to appear casual. When I opened it, cold air rushed in, and there she was. Her auburn hair tousled from the wind, a leather satchel slung across her shoulder. She smiled when she saw me, though her eyes quickly darted to the scarf wrapped around my head. "Ella," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "Are you all right?" I forced a shaky laugh. "I've been better." She pulled back her gaze, searching my face. "We don't have much time." I need to show you this. We slipped into the mudroom away from prying eyes. Olivia pulled the journal from her bag. Its leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. My hands trembled as I touched it. It's hers, Olivia said. I read enough to know it's real. She writes about the medicine she was forced to take, how she felt foggy and afraid. She mentions Liam by name and Victoria too. My throat tightened. My mother's handwriting sprawled across the first page, delicate loops and slanted letters. I traced them with my finger as if touching her through time. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. We both froze. Victoria's voice carried from the kitchen, calling for a servant to bring more wine. Olivia stuffed the journal back into her satchel, and we moved quickly upstairs, to the guest room. Once the door was closed, I opened the journal again. Words spilled across the pages, Margaret's voice rising from the past. She wrote of nights where she woke disoriented, of Liam insisting she was unstable, of Victoria whispering that she was unfit to be a mother. One entry stopped me cold. December 20th, 2001. Margaret wrote, "He said if I left, he would take Ella from me. He said no one would believe me, not even my own son." Tears blurred my vision. Olivia put a hand on my shoulder. "This changes everything." I nodded, clutching the book to my chest. "But we have to be careful. If they find out you brought this here—" She gave a firm nod. "I know. I'll keep it with me until you need it." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the words pressing down on us. I remembered the night Margaret vanished. I was 4, but I remembered the sound of shouting, the way Daniel held my hand, the cold silence that followed. My dad had told me she had a breakdown and left. Victoria had said she was better off gone. Now, seeing my mother's own words, I knew the truth was far darker. The journal mentioned another name scrawled in a hurried hand, James H. Margaret had written that he was a friend, someone who promised to help her escape. My mind raced. Could this be James Holloway? The wealthy investor I had met briefly at a firm event months ago. His age fit. His presence in Boston society fit. My pulse quickened at the thought. A knock at the door startled us. Daniel's voice called softly. "Ella, can I talk to you?" I hid the journal under the bed quickly. Olivia perched on the chair, pretending to scroll on her phone. I opened the door a crack. Daniel stood there, his face pale, his eyes searching mine. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded stiffly. "Why?" "Because you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I laughed bitterly. Maybe I am. He hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Listen, Ella, you have to stop bringing up Mom. It's tearing everything apart." My anger flared. "Maybe it needs to be torn apart." His jaw tightened. "Dad is furious. Victoria, too. You're pushing them to the edge." "Good," I snapped. "Maybe that's where the truth will finally come out." He looked stricken. "What is the truth?" I stared at him, wondering how much he really knew. I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the way he could not hold my gaze. He whispered, "I just want peace." "Peace built on lies is not peace," I said. His face fell. He opened his mouth, but Olivia spoke suddenly, her voice calm but firm. "Sometimes silence makes you complicit, Daniel." He looked at her, startled. "Who are you?" "An old friend," she replied. "Someone who actually cares about what happened." Daniel's expression hardened. "This is a family matter. You shouldn't be involved." Olivia rose from her chair, her chin high. "If your family mattered, you would have protected your sister." His cheeks flushed. He looked at me, almost pleading. "Don't let her drag you deeper into this, Ella. Dad won't forgive you." I met his gaze, my voice low. Maybe I don't need his forgiveness. Daniel swallowed hard, then left without another word. The door clicked shut. Olivia exhaled. He knows more than he admits. I nodded, pulling the journal back out from under the bed. And I'm going to find out exactly what. The winter sun was already sinking when Olivia left to get some rest at a nearby inn. I hugged her tightly, whispering thanks into her ear. She promised to return in the morning. As I watched her car disappear down the icy road, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I held proof in my hands, my mother's own words telling me she had been silenced, manipulated, controlled, and I was determined that the truth would not stay hidden any longer. I returned inside, the warmth of the house hitting me like a wave. Voices from the dining room floated down the hall, cheerful and oblivious. I touched the scarf on my head, straightened my back, and walked toward the sound, carrying Margaret's journal close to my chest. The house was unusually still that night. After Olivia left for her inn and the last of the guests drifted away, I found myself wandering the dim corridors with Margaret's journal pressed against my chest. My dad and Victoria had retreated to their bedroom, their voices low and sharp through the closed door, and Daniel had slipped upstairs without saying goodnight. I felt the heavy quiet wrap around me like a cloak, both comforting and suffocating. Every step I took on the hardwood floors echoed like a reminder that I was not supposed to be awake. Back in the guest room, I shut the door softly and pulled the curtains closed. I sat cross-legged on the bed with the journal on my lap, the lamp casting a warm pool of light across its pages. I opened to the last entry Olivia had shown me, tracing the ink with my fingertips. My mother's words were rushed uneven as though she had been writing in fear. She spoke of Liam controlling her medication, of Victoria whispering poison into his ear. She spoke of her desperate plan to leave, to take me and start over somewhere new. I swallowed hard and turned the page. The ink grew blotchy as though her hand had shaken. She wrote that she feared Liam had planted listening devices in the house, that she could not speak freely to anyone. Then a line that sent chills through me. If anything happens to me, it will not be by my own choice. I pressed my hand to my mouth, my chest aching. For so long I had been told she abandoned me, that her mind had broken and she could not stay. To see in her own handwriting that she had feared for her life made my blood run cold. I set the journal aside and reached for the small USB I had hidden in the lining of my suitcase. It had been given to me by an old colleague months earlier, a copy of something strange. He said he found in my dad's files when working as a contractor. I had not dared to open it until now. My laptop hummed to life as I plugged the device in. A list of audio files appeared, each labeled with dates. The earliest was from 2015. I clicked one at random. My dad's voice filled the room, calm, professional, as though dictating notes. But the words were not about medicine. He was speaking to Victoria. She is becoming more difficult, he said. If she refuses again, we will have to increase the dosage. Victoria's voice responded, sharp and impatient. She won't sign anything if she can still think straight. You know that. My stomach lurched. I clicked another file dated just weeks later. Liam's voice again. Margaret is asking questions. She says she feels foggy, that she does not trust me. Victoria snapped back. Then give her more. Make her believe she is unstable. That way no one will question when she disappears. My hand flew to my mouth. The room tilted. They had plotted it together calmly, deliberately, like discussing the weather. I did not hear the creak of the door until it was too late. Ella. I spun around. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face pale in the lamplight. His eyes darted to the laptop screen, the audio still playing. His lips parted, his breath shallow. "What are you listening to?" he whispered. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering. Nothing. He stepped closer, his hands trembling. I heard Dad's voice. I heard Victoria. What was that? I hesitated, my throat dry. Then I said quietly, "It is the truth." He shook his head as if refusing to process. "No, that can't be real." I pulled the USB from the port and clenched it in my fist. "It is real, Daniel, and you know it. You've always known something." His eyes flashed with guilt. I saw things. When I was younger. Mom is crying. Dad gave her pills. I told myself it was for her health, that he was helping her. Tears burned my eyes. And when she disappeared, he swallowed hard. Dad told me she left, that she couldn't handle it anymore. He said it was better not to ask questions. My voice shook. And you believed him. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his face in his hands. I wanted to. I didn't want to see what was really happening. I sat beside him, gripping the USB. "Do you understand now? They didn't just lie. They destroyed her." His shoulders shook. "What do we do?" The words settled heavily in the air. I stared at the journal on the bed, at the stinging memory of my shaved head in the mirror. For the first time I felt a strange clarity. "We found proof," I said. "We make the world see what they did." He looked at me, his eyes wet. "That will ruin Dad." I held his gaze. He ruined himself. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Daniel rubbed his face, torn between loyalty and fear. He whispered, "If you play those recordings, they will come after you." I pressed the USB into my pocket. "Let them." He stood abruptly, pacing the room. "You don't understand. Dad has connections. He knows judges, doctors, and half the city. He will destroy you." I rose to my feet, my voice steady. "He already tried. Look at me." Daniel's eyes flicked to the scarf covering my head. He winced. I stepped closer. "You can stay silent and let them bury the truth again. Or you can help me. But I will not stop." His lips parted, then closed. He backed toward the door, conflicted. I need time." He left quickly, the door shutting behind him. I stood alone, the weight of the journal and the USB pressing against me like anchors. I sank back onto the bed, my hands trembling. The recordings played over and over in my mind, their cold voices weaving a noose around my mother's memory. I thought of Margaret's laughter, faint and fragmented in my childhood memories. I thought of her hands guiding mine as I learned to write letters, of her singing softly while folding laundry. Those moments had always felt fragile, dreamlike. Now I understand why. They had tried to erase her, to rewrite her story until even her daughter doubted it. Not anymore. I opened the journal again, flipping through the pages until I found a small scrap of paper tucked inside. It was a receipt from a pharmacy dated December 12, 2001. The medication listed was strong, far stronger than anything prescribed for mild anxiety. I clenched it in my hand. Another piece of proof. The night wore on. I paced the room, my mind racing. The risk was enormous. If Liam or Victoria discovered what I had, they would not hesitate to silence me the way they silenced her. But fear no longer held me. Rage did. At some point, exhaustion pulled me into a restless sleep. In my dreams, I saw Margaret, her hair flowing, her eyes sad but steady. She reached out a hand as if urging me forward. When I woke the next morning, pale light filtered through the curtains. The house was stirring again, footsteps in the hallway, voices downstairs. I tucked the USB into a hidden pocket in my coat, slid the journal back into Olivia's satchel for safekeeping, and prepared myself. Today would not be like yesterday. The smell of roasted turkey and buttered rolls drifted through the house, heavy and almost suffocating, as if the perfect holiday meal could hide the rot beneath. I stood in the upstairs hallway, clutching the small USB in my pocket, its edges pressed into my palm like a reminder of what I carried. My scalp itched under the scarf I had wrapped around it, the fabric scratchy against the raw skin. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognized myself, but the fire in my eyes told me I was not going to break. Downstairs, the dining room was alive again, voices bouncing off the walls, laughter that sounded rehearsed. I knew I could not wait any longer. If I kept the truth hidden, they would keep pushing me toward the same fate as my mother. It had to end tonight. I slipped into the kitchen, the USB clutched tight in my hand. The staff was bustling, but one of the younger servers paused when she saw me. "Are you all right, miss?" I nodded stiffly. "I just need to borrow the speaker system." She frowned, but did not argue, perhaps sensing something in my expression. She pointed to the small control box tucked near the counter. I thanked her and tucked the USB into the port, my fingers trembling but determined. When I entered the dining room again, every eye turned. I walked to the far end of the table and stood tall. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my voice came clear. "I want you all to hear something." Confusion flickered across faces. Liam looked up sharply, his glass halfway to his lips. Victoria's smile faltered. Daniel froze, his fork suspended in the air. The speakers clicked and then filled with the unmistakable sound of Liam's voice. Calm, professional, as if dictating notes, yet the words were poison. "She is becoming more difficult. If she refuses again, we will have to increase the dosage." The room went silent. Forks dropped against plates. Someone gasped. Then Victoria's voice came sharp and impatient. "She won't sign anything if she can still think straight. You know that." The sound seemed to shake the walls. Guests stared at one another, disbelief etched across their faces. I watched Liam's hand tighten around his glass, his knuckles whitening. Another clip played, dated just weeks later. Liam's voice again. "Margaret is asking questions. She says she feels foggy, that she does not trust me." Victoria's voice snapped back. "Then give her more. Make her believe she is unstable. That way no one will question when she disappears." The audio cut. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table, my breath heavy. "This is who you sit with. This is the truth about what happened to my mother." Murmurs erupted. A cousin whispered something frantically to her husband. An aunt shook her head, eyes wide with horror. The servers froze in the doorway, clutching trays. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the hardwood. "This is ridiculous. Those recordings are fabricated. Anyone can splice together voices." I held her gaze. "Then why do they sound so natural? Why do they fit the memories I've carried all my life?" She opened her mouth, but Liam slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" His voice cracked like a whip, silencing everyone. He stood slowly, his height and presence filling the room. His gray eyes burned into me. "You are sick, Ella. Just like your mother. You twist everything into lies because you cannot face reality." I felt my knees tremble, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "If I am sick, then what does that make you?" He sneered. "A dad trying to protect his family. Protect them from what? From the truth. From your own cruelty." His jaw clenched. He took a step closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous rumble. "You think you are stronger than her. You think you can survive what she could not." My hands clenched at my sides. "Yes, because I know what you did." Gasps rippled through the table. Daniel looked stricken, his eyes darting between us. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak but could not find words. Victoria's voice rose shrilly. "This is absurd." Margaret was unwell. Everyone knew it. She left because she could not handle life. I turned on her, my voice sharp. Then why did she wrote in her journal that if anything happened to her, it would not be by her own choice? Her face went pale. The slip of her expression was enough to send a murmur of recognition through the room. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some rising from their chairs. I saw judgment flicker in their eyes, doubt gnawing at the story Liam and Victoria had spun for years. Daniel suddenly pushed back his chair, his voice breaking. "Stop! Please stop!" He stood trembling, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw the boy I remembered, the one who had once held my hand on nights when I cried for my mother. "Ella," he whispered, "what do you want from me?" "The truth," I said. "Nothing less." Liam's face turned red, veins standing out in his neck. He pointed a finger at me, his voice thundering. "You will not destroy this family." I rose to my full height, though my legs shook. "I will not let you destroy me the way you destroyed her." The room broke into chaos. Some guests shouted, others hurried from the room. A cousin muttered that he was calling a lawyer. Victoria tried to regain control, smoothing her blouse and forcing a laugh, but her voice wavered. Daniel sank back into his chair, his face in his hands. Liam's glare seared me, his chest heaving with fury. The servers began clearing plates in a frenzy, desperate to escape the storm brewing at the table. I could not eat, could not breathe in that heavy room. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the clatter of dishes. I turned on my heel and walked out, my footsteps echoing in the hall. Behind me, I heard Liam's voice, low and cold, carrying through the silence. "She will not last, just like her mother." I stopped in the hallway, my hands pressed to the wall for support. The words sliced into me, but beneath the pain burned a deeper fire. He wanted me to crumble. He wanted me to snap. But I was not going to give him that satisfaction. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy but certain. In my room, I shut the door and sank against it, my chest heaving. The USB was still warm in my pocket. The proof existed. And they knew now that their lies were cracking. I sat on the bed, Margaret's journal beside me, and whispered into the stillness. "I am not broken. I am not you." The wind howled against the shutters, rattling them like a warning. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed, footsteps pacing. I knew the storm had only just begun. The snow had not stopped falling since dawn, blanketing the grounds in a silence that felt both protective and suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed with Margaret's journal spread open across my knees, my fingers tracing the faded ink that still carried the weight of her voice. The night before had shattered the false peace of our family table, and I could still hear the gasps of guests as the recordings played, still see the fury in Liam's eyes, and the pale tremor of Victoria's forced smile. Now the house was quieter than I had ever known it, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I turned to another entry dated December 22nd, 2001. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged, as if she had been writing in the dark. Margaret described waking from sleep with her head foggy, the bitter taste of pills still on her tongue. She wrote that Liam told her she had been hysterical and he had to medicate her for her own good, but she did not remember hysteria. She remembered begging him not to force her. The next line made my heart seize. She wrote that she had spoken to someone named James H., a man she trusted, who promised to help her leave and take Ella to safety. He had given her an address in Boston, told her to come when she was ready. I whispered the name under my breath, James H. My thoughts flew back to the tall, composed man I had once met at a law firm gala. James Holloway, the investor who carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made people listen. Could he be the same man my mother had pinned her last hopes on? I pressed my palm to the page, feeling the urgency of her words pulse through me. She had not been alone. She had reached for help. And now, decades later, I might find that help again. A knock startled me. I shoved the journal under the blanket and called out, my voice sharp from the jolt. "It's me, Olivia." I rushed to open the door. She slipped inside, brushing snow from her coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried a steaming cup of coffee from the diner near her inn and set it in my hands before pulling off her gloves. "You look like you haven't slept," she said softly. I shook my head. Sleep feels impossible in this house. She sat beside me, her gaze falling on the lump of blanket where the journal lay hidden. "Did you read more?" I nodded. She wrote about a man, James H. He promised to help her leave. Olivia's eyes sharpened. "Do you think it's James Holloway?" I exhaled, my pulse quickening. "I don't know, but if it is, he may hold the missing piece." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the hum of the heater against the cold. I could feel Margaret's presence in the room. The echo of her hope carried through the pages. Olivia touched my hand gently. "You're not alone in this." Her words steadied me, though fear still churned. If Liam or Victoria discovered we had this journal, they would stop at nothing to take it from us. I knew their rage was simmering, waiting for the right moment to strike. As if summoned by my thoughts, heavy footsteps passed in the hallway. Victoria's voice floated through the door, sharp and clipped as she gave instructions to someone about the afternoon meal. Olivia and I exchanged a look, both of us holding our breath until the sound faded. I pulled the journal back out and opened another entry. Margaret had written about the Christmas Eve dinner that year. She said Liam had poured her wine that tasted strange, and afterward she had felt dizzy. She wrote that Victoria had laughed when she stumbled, that Daniel had looked away. She had tried to write down the names of medications, but her handwriting dissolved into scrawls. At the bottom of the page, she had written one desperate line: "If I disappear, find James H." I closed the book, my chest aching. She had left us a trail, and no one had ever followed it. Until now. Olivia leaned closer. "We need to track him down." I nodded, my mind racing. He still has to be in Boston. Someone like him wouldn't vanish easily. The door burst open without warning. Victoria stood there, her lips pressed into a smile too tight, her eyes glittering. The journal was still in my hands. Her voice dripped with sugar. "What are you two whispering about here?" I snapped the journal shut and held it against my chest. "Just catching up," I said, my voice low but steady. Her gaze flicked to the book, and for a moment I saw fury flare behind her mask. She tilted her head. "You should be careful, Ella. Digging into the past can be dangerous." I forced a smile. "So can hiding the truth." Her nostrils flared, but she only gave a small laugh before stepping back into the hall. "Enjoy your secrets while you can." The door clicked shut. My hands shook as I clutched the journal. Olivia's eyes were wide. "She knows." I knotted my throat tight. "And that means we don't have much time." The rest of the day dragged on like a slow storm. At lunch, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Liam barely looked at me, his face stone. Victoria chatted with guests as though nothing had happened, though her fingers tapped restlessly against her glass. Daniel kept his eyes on his plate, silent and withdrawn. I picked at the food, my appetite gone. My mind focused only on the pages of the journal hidden upstairs. Every word screamed at me to act, to push further, to tear down the lies that had trapped us all for so long. After the meal, I slipped back to my room. I turned another page and found a letter Margaret had started but never finished. It was addressed simply to my Ella. Her handwriting wavered, but clear enough to read. She wrote that she loved me more than life itself, that if she could not protect me, she hoped one day I would be strong enough to protect myself. She wrote that James H. would know what to do. Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the paper to my lips and closed my eyes. I whispered to her that I was trying, that I would not let her sacrifice be in vain. A sudden knock startled me again. This time it was Daniel. His voice was low. "Ella, please let me in." I hesitated, then opened the door. He stepped inside, his shoulders hunched, his eyes shadowed. "I heard about what you played last night," he said quietly. "Everyone is talking." "Good," I replied. "They should know." He shook his head. "You don't understand. Dad is furious. He says you are destroying the family." I laughed bitterly. The family was destroyed a long time ago. He flinched, his voice breaking. "You don't know what it was like. He told me if I ever spoke out, he would cut me off. I was just a kid, Ella." I stared at him, my anger colliding with pity. "And now, you're not a kid anymore." His hands trembled. "I don't know how to undo it." I stepped closer, my voice low. "Start by telling the truth." His eyes welled with tears. He whispered I saw him give her pills. I saw Victoria watching. I told myself it was medicine. But I knew. Deep down I knew. The words cracked something inside me. I reached for his hand. "Then help me. Don't let them bury her again." He gripped my hand tightly, his face torn. "I'll try." That was all he could promise. That night I sat by the window, the journal open on my lap, the snow still falling thick outside. Margaret's words filled the room, her hope, her desperation, her plea for someone to find James H. I whispered into the dark that I had heard her, that I was following the trail. The house creaked and groaned, the old beams settling. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Victoria's heels clicking against the floor, then silence. My chest tightened, but I stayed still, holding the journal close. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. I knew that tomorrow would bring confrontation, that the walls Liam and Victoria had built were crumbling. And with Margaret's voice guiding me, I was ready to keep pushing until every last secret came crashing down. The house had grown tense after the storm of revelations, every room carrying the weight of words no one wanted to speak aloud. By the morning of the next day, the snow outside lay untouched, glistening under a pale sun. But inside the walls of the Miller home, the air was heavy and still. I woke with Margaret's journal pressed to my chest, its pages creased where I had clutched it through the night. Her voice haunted me, urging me forward, refusing to let me fall back into silence. I wrapped a sweater tightly around me and walked down the hall. The quiet was eerie. Usually, Victoria's heels would already be clicking across the kitchen tiles. Usually, my dad's low voice would be commanding the morning. But now the house seemed suspended. When I reached the dining room, I found Daniel sitting alone at the end of the table, his coffee untouched. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "We cannot keep doing this," he whispered. I pulled out a chair and sat opposite him. Doing what? Pretending. He rubbed his hands over his face. "You are going to destroy everything." I leaned forward. Everything was destroyed the night they took her from us. His eyes filled with conflict, but he did not argue. Instead, he dropped his gaze to the coffee cup and muttered, "I remember more than I want to." I felt my chest tighten. "Tell me." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not here. Not yet." The sound of footsteps made us both turn. Liam entered his presence, filling the room as always, his eyes locking onto me with cold calculation. He was dressed immaculately in a dark suit, as if even on a holiday he was ready to stand before a jury. His gaze flicked to Daniel, then back to me. "We need to speak," he said, his tone controlled. "Alone." Daniel started to protest, but Liam's hand shot up, silencing him. I rose slowly, my heart pounding, and followed my dad into the study. The heavy door closed behind us, muting the rest of the house. He walked to the window, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. For a long moment he said nothing, and I could hear the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Finally, he turned his eyes sharp. "You are tearing this family apart, Ella." My voice shook, but I kept it steady. "No, you did that years ago." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Your mother was unwell. I did what I had to do." I stepped closer, the journal clutched in my hand. "I know you drugged her. I know you made her doubt herself. I have her words. I have your voice on those recordings." His eyes narrowed. "That proves nothing. People will not believe you. They will believe me." I felt my stomach twist, but I did not back down. Maybe once they would have. Not anymore. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a crack in the mask. Then his face hardened again. "You think you are strong. You are nothing like her." I held his gaze. "That is exactly where you are wrong." The door opened abruptly, and Victoria swept in her perfume sharp, her smile tight. She looked between us, her voice dripping with feigned calm. "What is all this tension?" "It is Christmas." I turned to her. "Stop pretending. You know what you did?" Her eyes flashed, but she kept her tone sweet. Margaret was unstable. She left because she could not handle her life. My hand shook as I held up the journal. Then why did she write that if anything happened, it would not be by her choice? Why did she write that you whispered lies into his ear? Victoria's smile cracked. Her eyes darted to Liam, searching for guidance. He stared back at her, his jaw tight, and for the first time I saw fear beneath his control. Daniel burst into the room, his face pale. "Enough," he cried. "I cannot carry this anymore." We all turned to him. His hands trembled as he pointed at Liam. "I saw you give her pills. I saw Mom beg you to stop." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Victoria stepped back, her face draining of color. Liam's chest heaved, rage flashing in his eyes, but Daniel kept speaking, his voice cracking. "I was just a boy, but I remember. You told me to forget. You told me to stay quiet or you would cut me off. And I did. For years I did." My throat closed with emotion. Hearing him say it aloud felt like a chain breaking. I whispered, "Thank you." Liam roared, his fist slamming against the desk. "You ungrateful child." Daniel flinched but did not retreat. He looked at me, tears in his eyes. She was not crazy, she was trapped. The room fell silent, the truth echoing in the stillness. I felt Margaret's presence then, as if she stood with us. Her voice carried in Daniel's confession. Victoria tried to recover her tone, sharp and desperate. "This is madness. No one will believe this." I turned to her, my voice steady. "They already do." Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. The tension snapped when Liam lunged forward, his hand reaching for the journal in my grip. I stumbled back, clutching it tight, my breath caught. Daniel moved between us, blocking him. "Enough," Daniel shouted. "You will not touch her." For a moment, the three of us stood frozen. Liam's face was red with fury, Victoria's eyes wide with panic, Daniel trembling but firm. I held the journal to my chest, my heart pounding. Finally, Liam stepped back, his voice low and seething. "This is not over." He stormed out, Victoria following close behind, her heels striking hard against the floor. The door slammed shut, rattling the shelves. Daniel sank into the chair, his face pale, his hands shaking. I joined him, placing the journal on the desk between us. "You did the right thing," I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. "It took me too long." I touched his hand. "But you did it. That is what matters." We sat there in the dim light, the weight of truth pressing down yet somehow lifting something too. For the first time, I felt that the cracks in the lies were wide enough to let the light in. The house was no longer silent. Downstairs, I could hear raised voices, Liam and Victoria arguing in sharp tones, their control unraveling. The walls that had held their secrets for decades were breaking. I closed the journal gently and looked at Daniel. "This is only the beginning." He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes, and for the first time in years, I believed him. The morning after Daniel finally spoke, the truth felt like a storm waiting to break. The house was restless, every door slam echoing, every creak in the floorboards amplified. I barely slept, my nerves stretched thin, but when I looked in the mirror, I saw something I had not seen in years. Resolve. My scalp was still raw beneath the scarf, but my eyes no longer looked hollow. They burned with purpose. Downstairs, the tension had grown impossible to ignore. Liam paced the living room like a caged animal, his voice rising in muffled arguments with Victoria. Guests had left in whispers the night before, scandal heavy in the air, and now the holiday home stood stripped of its facade. What remained was raw, exposed, and trembling on the edge of collapse. Olivia arrived mid-morning, her coat dusted with snow. She carried her laptop and a folder thick with notes. Her face was grave, but when she saw me, she gave a small smile. "You did it," she said quietly. "You cracked him." I shook my head. "He is not cracked yet. He is dangerous." She followed me into the den, where Daniel sat hunched over with his head in his hands. He looked up when we entered, his eyes red. Olivia sat across from him and opened the folder. "I published the article this morning," she said. "I included a portion of the recordings, not all, but enough to make people listen." My chest tightened. "Already?" She nodded. "The response has been immediate. Journalists are calling. Some are already on their way here." Daniel's head snapped up, his face pale. "You cannot bring the press here. Dad will explode." Olivia's voice was calm but firm. "The world needs to see. This is not just about your dad's rage. It is about the truth." I placed a hand on Daniel's arm. "We cannot hide anymore. If we stay silent, Margaret's story dies again." He exhaled shakily and nodded, though fear still clouded his eyes. By afternoon, the driveway was lined with cars. News vans parked along the snowy road, their antennas reaching skyward. Reporters in heavy coats clutched microphones, their breath steaming in the cold. Cameras glared under the winter sun. The hum of voices carried into the house, sharp and relentless. Liam's face when he saw them was a mask of fury. He stormed into the foyer, his voice booming. "Who brought them here?" I stepped forward, my hands steady at my sides. "I did." His eyes burned into me. "You ungrateful child." I met his gaze. "I am not a child anymore." Victoria appeared at his side, her lipstick perfect, her smile brittle. She tried to shoo the reporters away with empty words, but the questions poured over her. "Did you medicate Margaret Miller against her will? Did you conspire with Liam to have her declared unstable? What happened the night she disappeared?" The walls of lies cracked under the weight of those questions. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker across her face. Inside the house, the tension turned violent. Liam grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "You will ruin us," he hissed. I yanked free. "No, you ruined yourself the moment you chose control over love." Daniel stepped between us, his voice loud enough to carry down the hall. "Stop it, Dad. It is over." Liam's face twisted. "You think you can betray me and survive?" Daniel's voice shook, but held firm. "I am not betraying you. I am telling the truth." The words seemed to freeze Liam in place. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his control slipping. Victoria clutched his sleeve, whispering frantically, but he shoved her hand away. He turned back to me, his voice low and venomous. "You will regret this." I forced myself to stand tall, though my knees trembled. I already regret staying silent for so long. The reporters pressed closer, their voices calling through the open door. Daniel faltered, then suddenly raised his voice. "I saw him give her the pills. He told me to lie. He told me to forget." Gasps erupted from the crowd outside. Cameras flashed. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Liam's face drained of color. For a moment the room spun. My brother, who had been silent for so many years, had finally spoken not just to me, but to the world. The chaos was broken by the arrival of a sleek black car pulling into the drive. The reporters turned, microphones raised as a tall figure stepped out. James Holloway. His presence seemed to command silence. He adjusted his coat and strode up the walkway, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling on me. "Ella Miller," he said when he reached the porch. His voice was deep, steady. "I knew your mother." The world tilted beneath me. "You knew her?" He nodded. "She came to me once frightened, desperate. She told me things that haunted me for years. I tried to help her, but she vanished before I could. I never stopped wondering what happened." Tears stung my eyes. "She wrote about you, in her journal. She trusted you." He looked at Liam, then his eyes cold. "And I see now why she disappeared." The reporters clamored for quotes, their voices rising. But James raised a hand and the noise still. His gaze stayed on me. "You are not alone, Ella." Those words settled into me like a promise. For the first time, I felt the tide turning. Inside, Liam staggered back, his composure cracking. Victoria's face was pale, her hands trembling as she tried to mask panic with a forced smile. Daniel stood tall beside me, his voice steady now. "We are done being silent." The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment, the family unraveling under the weight of truth. I clutched Margaret's journal to my chest, my heart pounding, the sound of reporters shouting questions blending with the howl of the wind. The world finally saw us, finally heard us, and though fear still coiled in my stomach, I felt something stronger rise above it. Hope. The courthouse in Manhattan rose before me like a stone monument, its columns etched against the gray winter sky. It was late December of 2024, and the streets buzzed with the rhythm of the city, but my focus narrowed on those steps. I had walked into many buildings in my life, but never with the weight that pressed against me now. In my coat pocket lay Margaret's journal, its leather edges worn from my hands. In my bag sat the USB filled with the voices of Liam and Victoria, their calm cruelty preserved for the world to hear. Daniel walked beside me, his jaw set, his eyes shadowed, yet he moved with purpose. Olivia carried her laptop notes spilling from her folder, her determination a shield for me when my own strength faltered. Inside the courthouse, the air was sharp with the scent of polished wood and old paper. Lawyers in suits moved briskly, their voices low and urgent. Reporters crowded near the entrance, their cameras flashing as we passed. James Holloway's presence parted them, his stature commanding respect. He had promised to stand by me, and he kept that promise. His eyes met mine as we entered the courtroom. "You are ready," he said. I took my place at the plaintiff's table, my heart pounding. Across the aisle, Liam and Victoria sat with their attorneys, their faces carved from stone. Liam's gaze met mine, cold and unyielding, but I no longer trembled beneath it. Victoria adjusted her pearl necklace with trembling fingers, her smile brittle. The room quieted as the judge entered, his gavel striking once. Opening arguments began. My attorney, Helen Brooks, rose and spoke with a voice that carried through the chamber. She laid out the evidence, the journal, the recordings, the testimony. She spoke of Margaret Miller, a woman silenced by those who should have protected her, and of me, her daughter carrying her truth forward. Her words wrapped around me like a mantle, steady and clear. Then Liam's attorney rose, his tone smooth, his words sharp as knives. He painted Margaret as unstable, me as delusional, Olivia as manipulative. He claimed the recordings were fabrications, the journal the ramblings of a sick woman. He called me a bitter daughter inventing ghosts. The words stung, but I kept my eyes fixed on the journal, my fingers pressed against its worn cover. Witnesses were called. Daniel took the stand, his hands shaking, his voice breaking as he spoke. He told the court how he had seen our dad give pills to our mother, how he had been told to forget, how silence had been demanded of him. His confession cut through the courtroom like a blade. For the first time, I saw Liam's mask falter. Victoria shifted in her seat, her composure cracking. When she was called to testify, her voice quivered beneath the weight of questions. She denied deflected, spun stories, but each denial only deepened the cracks. My attorney played a recording, her own voice saying, "Then give her more. Make her believe she is unstable." The sound filled the room and gasps rippled through the audience. Victoria paled, her lips trembling. Finally, Liam was called. He walked to the stand with his usual authority, his back straight, his face hard. He spoke of Margaret as unwell, of himself as a man burdened with protecting his family. But when the recordings of his voice were played calm and deliberate, the illusion shattered. The jury watched him, their eyes narrowing, their pens scratching notes. His denial sounded hollow against the weight of his own words. I was called last. My legs trembled as I walked to the stand, but when I sat and placed my hand on the journal in my lap, I felt Margaret's presence steady me. I spoke of my childhood memories of the night she disappeared, of the years of silence that followed. I told them about waking up on Christmas Eve with my head shaved, Victoria's laughter echoing, Liam's voice comparing me to my mother when she snapped. I told them that they tried to break me the same way they broke her, but I stood before them alive, unbroken, carrying her truth. The courtroom was silent when I finished. I saw faces soften, eyes glisten. For the first time in my life, people listened. Closing arguments came swift and sharp. My attorney reminded the jury of the journal, the recordings, and the testimony. She spoke of betrayal, of cruelty disguised as care, of a family bound not by love but by control. She spoke of justice not just for me, but for a woman who never got her chance to speak. The jury deliberated for hours that stretched like days. I sat in the quiet hallway, Daniel pacing, Olivia whispering encouragement, James steady as stone. At last, the bailiff called us back in. We stood as the jury filed in, their faces grave. The foreperson read the verdict. Guilty. The word rang in my ears like a bell. Victoria gasped, her hand clutching her chest. Liam's face went rigid, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed the truth. For once, he could not control the story. The judge's gavel struck. Sentences would be decided in weeks, but the truth was declared. I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. Margaret's voice seemed to whisper through the silence. You did it. Outside the courthouse, the winter sun broke through the clouds. Reporters swarmed, their microphones thrust forward. But for a moment, all I felt was the cold air on my face and the warmth of freedom inside me. Daniel stood at my side, his shoulders heavy but his voice soft. I am sorry, Ella. I should have spoken years ago. I turned to him. You spoke when it mattered. That is enough. Olivia hugged me tightly, her voice steady. The world knows now. They cannot bury her again. James Holloway placed a hand on my shoulder. Your mother would be proud. I clutched the journal to my chest, the weight of it no longer a burden but a legacy. For the first time, I felt that Margaret was free. Her story carried not as shame but as truth. That night back in Boston, I sat by my window watching the city lights shimmer. My head was still bare, my body still marked, but I felt whole. I whispered to my reflection that I was not broken, that I was my mother's daughter, that I had survived. And as I end this story now, I want to leave something with you who have listened. If you have ever been silenced, if you have ever been made to doubt your truths, remember that silence does not erase reality. Remember that dignity can be reclaimed, that even after years of being unseen, you can rise and speak. This is my story, but it might also be yours. Share it if you know someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts, your voices, your own truths in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories of justice, betrayal, and the power of survival, subscribe and stay with me. We carry each other forward.